Right now, our forces are taking control of more and more territory. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are simply burning the occupiers out of their positions. Shock. Could the liberation of Donetsk really be starting? Missiles helped. A fierce rout has begun. And at this very moment, the Ukrainian army is advancing. Ukrainian ballistic missiles are blowing everything up. The enemy's front lines and rear positions are being torn apart before our eyes. Ukrainian innovations are in the sky right now. These strikes have changed everything. The Ukrainian armed forces are unstoppable. There is chaos and panic in Moscow. Urgent, a new confrontation between Trump and Putin. The world is coming apart at the seams. At this very moment, there is an attack on NATO. The decision is already on the table in the Kremlin. Ukraine is advancing, Crimea is exploding. Shock, the little green men are already at NATO's border. Phase 0 has been launched. Has Putin really made up his mind? War is one step away from Europe. Estonia is urgently mobilizing its troops. Trump has gone on the offensive. Tomahawks are already flying. Putin is in panic. America is baring its teeth. This strike will finish off Russia, and Trump has already made his decision. Support is coming. Europe and the US are creating an impenetrable shield. The phase of retribution has begun. Breaking news. The Czech Republic has activated combat export mode for Ukraine. This is a complete failure for the Kremlin. Factories are already running at full capacity, and all of it is for the Ukrainian armed forces. Russia is in shock. The world has never seen so much ammunition. All this and more in our next episode of Hotspot. The front is on fire, the enemy is advancing on all fronts again, and once more all the occupiers' equipment is destroyed. Their manpower is at a concert with Kobzon. The casualty numbers are simply mind-boggling. You have to see this. Our forces managed to drive the occupiers out of Donetsk, an impressive act of vengeance by the Iron Birds. The Kremlin isn't laughing anymore. See the first details in our report.
The Russian army is attacking along the entire front line but is making almost no progress anywhere. This is reported by the Institute for the Study of War. The next Russian General Staff offensive was planned in particular in the Kharkiv region. Near Vovchansk, the enemy had amassed enough forces for a breakthrough, but lost even before the offensive began. Atesh partisans report that their agent from the 82nd Motorized Rifle Regiment was able to transmit the exact coordinates of Russian artillery positions, armored vehicles, and locations where the occupiers were stationed. Because of this, Ukraine's defense forces were able to prepare in advance for possible offensive actions and strike back at the enemy in response. As a result of the effective work of the Ukrainian military, the Russian plan collapsed before it even began.
By taking advantage of the weather conditions, uncomfortable weather, the lack, for example, of the usual intensity of our drone operations, because the drones simply either won't be able to see or won't be able to take off, the enemy will try to carry out more active assault operations. In fact, this includes the use of mechanized components, which we are already observing today in certain areas of the front.
At the same time, the situation remains tense in the area around the city of Kupiansk. There, too, our military is observing an enemy buildup as they repeatedly try to increase their presence in the settlement. However, despite constant attempts to launch new assaults, Russia has made no advances in this direction.
Unfortunately, the enemy has managed to reach the outskirts of the city. You know that fighting continues there in the northwestern and northern parts of the city. The enemy is also trying to infiltrate the central part of Kupiansk with sabotage and reconnaissance groups. The situation is very difficult. The goal is clear: to break out into open operational space and try to advance further through Kharkiv region, with an attempt to seize. The attempt to take control of Kupiansk, a key railway hub, is also about logistics. In other words, it's an attempt to cut off our logistics and create unfavorable conditions for those troop groupings located at this part of the front, as well as neighboring areas.
The Dobropilia direction is probably the hottest spot on the front today. In the past 24 hours, heavy fighting has broken out there for the settlement of Vladimirovka. It is from there the Russians are trying to break through to their own forces who remain encircled here.
An additional problem was the landing of paratroopers, Deep State adds. The Russians brought between 50 and 75 infantrymen into the village. The situation is becoming difficult. Analysts warn that the Russian armed forces will try to take full advantage of the worsening weather conditions. Later, the 1st Corps of the Azov National Guard reported that they had managed to hold Vladimirovka.
According to the Corps' statement, the Russians launched their assault with 35 units of heavy armored vehicles, including tanks and armored fighting vehicles. As a result of defensive actions, 1 armored tractor, 3 tanks, and 16 enemy armored fighting vehicles were destroyed or damaged. The Russians also lost 41 motorcycles and 2 light vehicles. Near the neighboring town of Pokrovsk, the Russian forces also decided to build up their presence. A group of infantry on motorcycles was sent to break through. As a result, 13 motorcyclists were taken out and there was no advance. Here's another epic video from Donetsk region, Ukrainian drones versus Russian tanks. The Ukrainian Armed Forces showed how our troops destroyed half a dozen enemy tanks and a Grad multiple rocket launcher system. The video was published by the UAV forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Thus, in the Donetsk direction, operators of the 427th Separate UAV Regiment Ararok stopped the enemy's assault actions by knocking out 5 tanks at once, depriving the infantry group of cover and making further advance impossible, according to the report. In addition, the military delivered an effective strike on a BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launcher system. When the enemy was firing at the positions of the Ukrainian army, according to the command, the defense forces have now managed to gain a tactical advantage in this area. At the same time, our military is operating not only along the front line, but also in the rear of the Russian grouping. Thus, in occupied Donetsk, a large-scale fire broke out after drone strikes. According to locals, plumes of black smoke could be seen from anywhere in the city. It is known that the former Aukran hypermarket near the Sloviansk-Donetsk-Mariupol bypass road was hit. However, residents reported online that after the strikes, they clearly heard further detonations, and the night before they had seen a concentration of military vehicles near the store. It is known that as a result of the fire, the roof of the building collapsed, and the premises themselves were completely
feeling utterly and completely burned out.
Meanwhile, in Russia, against the backdrop of failures at the front, the pace of mobilization has sharply declined. Recruitment into the ranks of the occupiers has dropped almost threefold, which is already being felt by units at the front, said Ivan Timochka, head of the Council of Reservists of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. According to him, the Russian Federation is trying to solve this problem in several ways. In particular, they have passed a bill in the first reading that allows for mobilization for compulsory military service throughout the year. Timochka says that the Russian Federation may use conscripts, including in the war against Ukraine.
In the last 2 quarters, they have been recruiting by the quarter, not even by the month, 30,000, 35,000 at a time. Whereas before they used to recruit that number in a month, and now it takes 3 months. So now they are recruiting 10 or 12,000 per month.
At the same time, military analysts note that in the Russian information space, they no longer even hide the prospects for the newly mobilized, openly stating that, on average, after signing a contract, they are expected to live less than 2 weeks.
The mayor of the city of Strizhevoy in the Tomsk region has reached a new level of candor. And he honestly said that new contract soldiers are needed to replace those who have been killed and wounded. According to the head of the city, on Friday he recruits new people, and on Monday, they bury the old ones. War correspondent Romanov gave a more detailed explanation of why people are constantly needed at the front. The life expectancy of an assault soldier is 12 days. That's from signing the contract, training at the range, and the actual assault itself. In the singular, usually there is only one assault.
And this statistic is relentlessly confirmed by the Ukrainian Armed Forces. According to the General Staff, in the past 24 hours alone, the occupiers have lost more than 1,200 of their soldiers. In total, Russian losses have surpassed 1,122,000 people.
A strike at the heart of Russia. Flamingo and Neptune are loaded. Ukrainian ballistics sweep away everything in their path. Panic in Moscow. Russia is under a barrage of fire, chaos and flight. This is a new phase of the war. Ukrainian missiles are tearing Russia's defenses to shreds. Watch the fiery details right now.
The consequences of the war unleashed by Russia are starting to return to its own territory with Ukrainian drones and long-range missiles. The General Staff does not deny that after Belgorod, Muscovites themselves may soon experience what a blackout is like.
The X isn't working. This is Udanova. On the right, there are the 10th, 12th, and 14th. Darkness. To the left, Putinova is in darkness. Either the Putinova and Stanina intersection. The metaphor isn't really working effectively at all.
Meanwhile, two more Russian regions, Tyumen and Sverdlovsk Oblast, have introduced restrictions on gasoline sales, no more than 30 liters per person. Previously, this new rule on the market affected Khabarovsk Krai, Chelyabinsk Oblast, and the occupied Crimea. All these lines and empty gas stations are due to daily attacks on oil refineries. Commander-in-Chief Syrsky stated that in September, under the Deep Strike program, 70 hits on Russian territory were reported.
We are destroying the aggressor country's production of fuel and lubricants, explosives, as well as other components of the Russian military-industrial complex. Among other things, oil production in Russia has decreased by 21%.
The intensification and expansion of Ukraine's so-called long-range sanctions across Russian territory became one of the main topics at the president's meeting with the security bloc.
Ukrainian long-range weaponry is becoming significantly. We are constantly working on this and have already provided a wide range of opportunities for production, the necessary funding, and all the required support. We also need to significantly scale up their use. We have clear plans regarding this for the coming months. Everything must be implemented. Ukrainian precision is already visible, but there should be more. It is absolutely fair that Ukraine delivers retaliatory, targeted strikes unlike Russia. We know what we want. We want to achieve, of course, peace.
Currently, the carriers of sanctions deep into Russian territory are the Flamingo and Neptune missiles. The company Firepoint announced the start of production of the first ones at the end of the summer. At that time, footage of a Flamingo launch appeared online. And analysts suggested, in fact, that they flew as a greeting to the territory of occupied Crimea. The publication Welt reported that it was these missiles that destroyed the FSB base on the peninsula. 3 missiles left craters 15 meters in diameter each.
It exploded.
At the same time, German journalists stated that 50 missiles are rolling off the assembly line every month, with plans to reach 200 per month. And now the Russians have supposedly displayed the wreckage of a downed Flamingo missile. According to their information, it was hit on Russian territory by a Buk system at an altitude of 100 meters and a speed of 600 kilometers per hour. Judging by the serial number, the occupiers assume this is the 106th munition produced in September. There is no reliable confirmation that the Flamingo destroyed the FSB base. Military analysts believe that the successful strikes, and not only those, could have been carried out by the Neptune itself. Today, 3 of its modifications have already been tested and put into serial production in the Ukrainian defense industry. A 4th is in preparation. Testing is currently underway. This is
the long-range Neptune, which can reach over 1,000 kilometers. It is currently undergoing testing. It has already achieved, let's say, some positive hits. And further on, the issue of putting it into serial production will be addressed in parallel. I believe this Neptune series makes the country more capable and reveals our combat potential. Because not every country in the world possesses cruise missiles, let alone cruise missiles that in the future will be both sea and land-based. And let's say with different ranges.
For obvious reasons, Ukrainian weapons manufacturers do not share much information about strikes against the aggressor. Thank you. But President Zelensky has admitted to the press that the defense forces even combine them. And this, analysts admit, is a successful practice that Ukrainians can adopt from their enemy. This
missile is likely to be produced in larger quantities, but due to other factors, it is also cheaper compared to the high-tech Neptune missile. And here there are a whole range of combinations. For example, the Neptune missile, being less detectable and more accurate, can be used for clearing a corridor or even the other way around. For instance, a number of Flamingo missiles, which will be highly visible but very cheap, can be used as decoy missiles to draw the attention of air defense forces, the enemy at the time when the less visible but more accurate Neptune missile will pass through and deliver a targeted strike.
The Ukrainian defense industry is no longer what it was at the start of the full-scale Russian aggression. The country's military and political leadership has finally realized that only local arms manufacturers can guarantee stable weapons supplies to the front, provided there is adequate funding. But with each passing day, as more and more unknown drones terrorize EU skies, Europeans and Scandinavians are showing greater interest not only in Ukraine's experience, but also in cooperating with Ukraine in the production of weapons suited to the realities of modern warfare.
The world is on the brink of madness. The US and Russia are reaching a new level of confrontation. Shock? A Kremlin attack on NATO could begin at any moment. Medvedev is once again threatening with the nuclear club. Crimea is ablaze. SBU drones have struck top targets. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are advancing while Russia faces panic and a failed mobilization. Don't miss the most important news from the weekend right now.
A coup in France? Macron is losing power.
Macron's approval rating continues to plummet. According to the latest poll, the level of trust in the president of France has dropped to 14%.
The trade war between the US and China is gaining momentum.
Starting November 1st, 100% tariffs will be imposed on top of those already in place. In addition, export controls are being introduced for any software. This means that China will only be able to purchase software for which it receives permission from the American authorities.
Putin's mustache, Peskov, is threatening Moldova.
They believe that pursuing closer relations with Europe means complete antagonism toward Russia. One country has already made this mistake. Nothing good came of it for that country, Peskov stated.
And the Belarusian Batka is threatening Ukraine.
I say this with full responsibility because I see it happening every day, in fact. And this could lead to the disappearance of Ukraine as a state.
Solovyov has lost his mind. The propagandist is calling for the return of the death penalty.
And on the third day, hang them and let the bodies dangle instead of always debating, oh, the death penalty, how could that be possible?
There will be no gasoline. The fuel crisis has affected more than half of Russia's regions.
The daily work at the Rosneft gas station continues. There's no gasoline anywhere except at Rosneft.
In Kazakhstan, they've decided to take a tough stance against maniacs.
On October 17th, the country will begin castrating pedophiles.
An ultimatum for Putin. Trump is ready to supply Tomahawks to Ukraine. The propagandist is in a panic.
With the Tomahawk's 2,500-kilometer range, the entire European part of Russia is in its sights.
Burn, burn bright, Feodosia is on fire again. Rostov was shaken too. You're all over the entire city, aren't you? Oh, It's caught fire. The states are helping Ukraine strike Russian oil refineries.
Washington is providing intelligence and pointing out weak spots in the targets. Now Ukrainian Armed Forces drones are striking farther and more accurately.
One bird down. A Russian Ka-52 military helicopter has crashed with its crew.
This is already the 65th helicopter lost since the start of the invasion of Ukraine. Pro-Russian channels have confirmed the crash. The pilots were killed. There were no combat operations. It seems Russian helicopters are crashing even without being fired upon.
The weapon of the future. The US has unveiled a new drone missile.
It reaches a speed of about 0.75 Mach and carries a 45-kilogram warhead. Cheap, long-range, and dangerous.
The war is over. Trump has arrived in Israel. 738 days in captivity, Israelis are returning home.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Putin's troops are at NATO's doorstep. Little green men have appeared on the border with Estonia. The Russian army is moving into phase 0. Lukashenko isn't lagging behind either. Belarus has been put on alert. Tension is rising. Is there a threat to Ukraine? Find out more in the following report.
Putin's little green men are already at Estonia's doorstep. It seems the bunker dweller is preparing a Crimea 2.0 operation in Europe. Western media are publishing footage in which you can see armed men on the road. Judging by their uniforms, it's clear these are definitely not Russian border guards. Due to this sudden activation of unidentified Russian troops in the areas of checkpoints between Russia and Estonia, the police department has urgently closed the country's eastern borders.
we decided to close the road to prevent possible provocations and incidents. Our main goal is the safety of the Estonian population. Günter Pedosk, operational head of the southern prefecture.
The safety of their own population is the top priority for all Baltic countries. For example, today Latvia is expelling at least 841 Russian citizens from the country. These are Russians who were unable to prove even a basic knowledge of the Latvian language. The EU country no longer wants to see the Kremlin's fifth column on its territory.
The stay of such Russians in Latvia will be considered illegal and their access to social services will be closed. If the Russians remain, they will face deportation. Madara Pukve, representative of the Latvian Office of Citizenship and Migration Affairs.
Due to the possible Russian attack on NATO, the alliance is preparing to evacuate 1.2 million people. According to the authorities of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, this is the number of citizens who would need to flee from war in the event of aggression from the Kremlin. We are talking about at least a 40-kilometer strip along the borders with Russia and Belarus. For Lithuania, this would mean a total evacuation. The capital would also fall into the potential frontline zone. However, in Vilnius, they are confident that such a scenario is unlikely.
An emergency of such scale, which would require evacuating Vilnius entirely, is unlikely to develop in just one day. That is, it may well be necessary to start with some localized relocations, such as the eastern outskirts of the city or even individual neighborhoods. But we proceed from the assumption that ultimately our resources must be prepared for the evacuation of all 600,000 residents of Vilnius.
Meanwhile, in Estonia, which has closed its borders, local churches, schools, universities and sports arenas are already actively preparing to receive internally displaced persons. Special transportation, trains and buses are being allocated for this purpose. Residents are being assigned to potential evacuation points and given maps and information about evacuation routes. Europeans themselves are preparing supplies of food and first aid kits, and they're packing emergency bags in case they need to flee suddenly.
People have been talking about this for a long time. For the past several weeks, even months. At work, everywhere. We'll see what happens. For now, we need to take care of the most urgent things.
Altogether, the population of the Baltic countries exceeds 6 million people. Of these, almost 2.9 million live in Lithuania. Almost 2 million in Latvia and 1.4 million people in Estonia. In Vilnius, evacuation plans are being prepared for about a quarter of the population. In Latvia, it's a third. In Estonia, 10%. And that's taking into account the most optimistic forecasts. According to military analysts, if Putin launches a full-scale offensive against the Baltic countries, all residents without exception could become forced migrants.
They have platforms for various types of missile weapons which can strike in the shortest possible time. As one of our sources told us, these systems can literally be rolled out of garages. For example, at the Luga military base just 100 kilometers from the Estonian border, it would take only 5 minutes to load Iskander missiles and launch enough of them to cover the entire territory of Estonia and most of Latvia.
Meanwhile, Russian propaganda is foaming at the mouth, insisting that the Kremlin's intentions are purely peaceful and that the Baltic countries supposedly have nothing to fear. Even Bunkerman himself, putting on an innocent face, tries to reassure the West.
We have never initiated military confrontation ourselves. It's pointless, unnecessary, and simply absurd. They can't possibly believe that. They can't possibly believe what they're saying. That Russia is planning to attack NATO because it's impossible to believe such nonsense.
In much the same way, right before February 2022, Moscow insisted they had no intention of invading Ukraine. Earlier in 2014, Putin also denied the involvement of Russian army soldiers in the annexation of Crimea. So it's no surprise that, at the first sight of little green men, the Baltic countries began preparing for the worst.
The nature of hybrid warfare is such that you might not realize whether it's already a war, a single attack, or just an accident. The same goes for damaged cables, communications in the Baltic Sea, or the plane that recently crashed in Lithuania. Was it an attack or an accident? Not to mention the constant problems with GPS signals in the area of the Suwałki corridor.
And Putin's loyal friend Alexander Lukashenko is actively adding fuel to the fire at the NATO border. The latter has managed to carry out yet another dirty provocation by unexpectedly putting the troops in Belarus on alert. The country's Ministry of Defense cheerfully reported that units are already moving to designated areas to carry out the tasks assigned by Batka.
The armed forces units involved in the combat readiness check are moving to their assigned areas.
However, analysts insist that all of this is more for show than actual preparation for a real invasion. Belarus will continue to constantly escalate the situation and threaten with combat readiness checks. As for the Russian army, it is so bogged down in the war in Ukraine that the Kremlin simply doesn't have the strength to open a second front. Nevertheless, everything could change quickly.
Recruiting new soldiers takes quite a long time. But in principle, it's probably a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. Something like that. Because there are fairly capable units on the front in Ukraine. So all that's needed is to simply transfer them. That wouldn't take much time. And then rearm them, reorganize them somehow.
Among experts, there is also an opinion that Russia is already preparing for war with NATO, and it might strike earlier than intelligence agencies expect. For example, the American Institute for the Study of War claims that Moscow has entered the so-called Phase Zero in preparing for a confrontation with the alliance. Russia is building up reserves and developing new tactics for waging war without the mass use of armored vehicles, and is capable of launching new aggression without waiting for its army to fully recover after the war with Ukraine. Whether Putin will back down or actually attack the Baltic states, we will find out very soon.
Trump is baring his teeth. The US is increasing its support for Ukraine. Aid is coming through Europe. Tomahawks are already on their way. New sanctions are just around the corner. Putin can't escape. The Baltic states are under NATO's umbrella. The US is ready for confrontation. The world is holding its breath.
A simple but profound truth. To be confident in peace, we must prepare for war. From now on, the sole mission of the restored Ministry of War is as follows: to fight, to prepare for war and victory tirelessly and uncompromisingly. Not because we want war, we seek peace for our citizens.
Apparently, across the ocean, they finally decided whose side the truth is on. The US continues to supply Ukraine with weapons and resources. The Senate has approved the defense budget for the 2026 fiscal year, allocating $500 million in aid to Kyiv. According to CNN, the document was supported by 77 senators, with only 20 voting against.
Indeed, the US can now move to a qualitatively new level of influence on the peace process. At this moment, the US truly has the greatest capabilities. This concerns both economic pressure and moving to the next stage. It also applies to military assistance to Ukraine, and this too is in the capabilities of the US. I mean, not only sales, but also lifting restrictions on the use of certain types of weapons, which, according to reports, are already on their way to Ukraine.
At the same time, Donald Trump stated that the issue of providing Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles is almost resolved.
I can say this: it's obvious that weapons with a large warhead and long range can change Vladimir Putin's calculations. But a more active effort to intercept the Shadow Fleet can also have an effect. Moreover, the entire current package of requests from Ukraine, which is now being implemented very quickly, is yet another testament to the determination of NATO, our allies, and the United States. It's not just about air defense systems to protect Ukrainians, but also about very serious types of weaponry that Ukrainians can use directly on the battlefield.
At the same time, the United States is strengthening NATO's positions. The head of the White House stated that in the event of an attack by Russia, America is ready to defend, in particular, Finland, Poland, and the Baltic countries.
I think that Trump has realized that in a prolonged war stretched out over time, it will be the Western alliances that lose, while the anti-Western alliance leaders will actually gain influence, as they are already demonstrating. For now, they are only demonstrating these ambitions, but in order to prevent them from becoming reality, the West truly needs to show effectiveness and a willingness to restore the system to certain global rules.
And it seems that the Trump administration is not acting alone. A new Harvard University poll shows that the vast majority of Americans support a tougher Washington policy toward Russia. Among both Democrats and Republicans, the majority supports providing weapons to Ukraine and imposing new sanctions against Moscow. 72% and 73% respectively. There are even more supporters of additional economic sanctions. 71% of Democrats and 86% of Republicans. Moreover, 76% of Democrats and 86% of Republicans believe that Europe should stop buying oil from the aggressor and instead purchase it from the United States. And countries that continue to trade with Moscow should face additional tariffs. This is the opinion of 55% of Democrats and 66% of Republicans.
Given that the survey was conducted by a serious and reputable organization, this can be regarded with a high level of trust. And this is a positive trend. Because recently we observed a completely opposite dynamic when the number of people supporting aid, especially military aid to Ukraine, was decreasing. Now we are seeing a different trend. This is important. And undoubtedly, this is something that Trump and his administration should take into account, or at the very least, must consider. As we know, Trump pays close attention to public sentiment. And the fact that now the majority is on Ukraine's side. In this poll, on the side of the Republicans, undoubtedly, this should influence his attitude.
Times are changing and America is making it clear that the Kremlin regime will not go unpunished. Support for Ukraine, strengthening NATO, and the willingness to defend allies, all of this signals that the United States is seriously committed to containing escalation. By showing Russia that any new aggressive moves and refusal to move toward peace will lead to devastating consequences.
The Czech Republic's sensation bursts into the war with Russia. This is a stab in the back for Putin. The Czechs are building an arsenal for the front. This changes everything. Ammunition is flying straight to the front lines. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are preparing a powerful strike. Shocking details coming up in the report.
Ukraine and the Czech Republic are creating their own Ramstein. The goal of our country is to deepen this cooperation through the signing of an intergovernmental agreement and a support program for affected enterprises, an industrial Ramstein, noted Ukraine's Minister of Economy, Environment and Agriculture, Oleksiy Sobolev.
Not only the Czech defense industry, but also the country's political leadership is involved at the moment in so-called technical initiatives. It is a key element in the material and technical support of Ukraine's defense forces.
The Embassy of the Czech Republic in Kyiv reports that the Czech Republic supports the democratic transformation and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine both politically and through concrete projects and initiatives. For the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Ukraine is a priority country for transformational cooperation. It is a country of special focus within Czech development cooperation, as well as a beneficiary of humanitarian aid.
At present, according to the Czech initiative, around 2 million artillery shells have already been delivered. This has significantly strengthened the position of Ukraine's defense forces both in the moment and in counter-battery warfare, and accordingly has increased the effectiveness of firepower against the Russian occupiers. The Czech Republic, a steadfast ally, has generously supplied the Ukrainian Armed Forces with approximately 70 T-72 MN1 main battle tanks, more than 140 robust infantry fighting vehicles, numerous powerful multiple-launch rocket systems, and accordingly a substantial quantity of around 4.5 million rounds of ammunition, including essential shells for various artillery systems and critical rocket projectiles, in addition to a wide array of firearms.
Despite the war in Ukraine, 220 Czech companies remain in the country. Also, as part of their cooperation, Ukraine plans to provide the Czech Republic with a list of the industrial equipment needed by enterprises affected by the hostilities.
In this country, repairs are carried out on damaged armored vehicles and weaponry. In addition, artillery shells are produced here, primarily of Soviet calibers. Within the established and comprehensive framework of the Czech Republic, encompassing its legal, cultural, and governmental structures, various policies and initiatives are considered and implemented.
Initiative, the processes of procuring and delivering ammunition are being optimized.
Ukraine is also providing both airplanes and helicopters, as well as the personnel of the respective aviation units of its armed forces. At the present moment, the primary and most significant initiative of the Czech Republic is precisely the crucial creation of so-called coalitions, which are primarily and strategically aimed at substantially enhancing the defensive capabilities of Ukraine's valiant defense forces in effectively confronting the ongoing Russian aggression.
The historical memory of the Czech people remembers well the calamity that Russia can bring to foreign lands. That is why the Czechs support Ukraine, which is now fighting the aggressor, preventing the Russians from seizing not only their own country but all of Europe.
That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.